gospel text is on the back of your bulletin. Gospel from St. Matthew, the 5th chapter, the first 12 verses. These are the first words of Jesus after calling the disciples. The crowds had begun to follow him, and they gathered on the Sea of Galilee, where he went up the mountain and sat down to teach, a place of honor in the rabbinical tradition. The teacher sits, the students stand. There were no pews, by the way. We gathered that tradition into Christianity in the early churches for a few centuries. And that's where we get our phrase from going to the wall. People would not eat before they went to receive the sacraments. And as you know, to stand sometimes in a little longer service, people got weak. And along the outer wall, they had usually 3 or 4 rows of seating in cement, by the way, against the walls. We discover all those things through archaeology. So these are basic Christian instructions. Instructions to the disciples and followers. It's the longest and most elaborate talk of Jesus that we have, and it continues to chapter 7 and verse 27. It is a revolutionary teaching that I'm going to read you. It's called the Ordination Address to the 12, or Jesus' first sermon, the compendium of the teaching of Jesus. It's called the New Decalogue because some scholars think that this was given in 10 because Jesus went up the mountain as Moses did. Moses stood up to receive the word from God. Jesus sat as a place of honor. Therefore, the 10 Commandments in some scholars' eyes are replaced in these verses of the Beatitudes that we read today. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain. And after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." You will notice the emphasis is on the second half of the 8 Beatitudes. It's funny how we raise our children, and we reflect upon that when we see our grandchildren being raised, or great-grandchildren. My wife and I thought it was very important that our children learn certain things. I contributed what I thought was important, and she in her way. One of those things was the annual pilgrimage to the Nutcracker. Believing in great art and pageantry and dance and children and nutcrackers, I was glad to let Marge perform that duty of taking the two boys. They did this about 3 years, or 4 or 5, in that age where the children are just charming, 9 through 12, in that bracket. One year, Marge did it to me. She got sick. And here we had these expensive tickets to go to the Nutcracker, and what happened? But it was my turn to take the boys. I thought my job was to take them to basketball games and football games and teach them weightlifting and to do all the things that real men do. But I was informed it was my turn because she was sick to take them to the Nutcracker. Well, I didn't really relish that idea, so I gathered them up and off we went to the Nutcracker, and we were just having a great time, and it was kind of fun, somewhat. And it came the intermission. And we got out with our green punch or our orange punch or whatever color of punch or water that we had and a cookie. And we were eating away and drinking away, certainly looking forward to the second half. When one of the boys looked at me and said, "Dad, could we go? We did the first half." And they forced me and pulled my arm behind me, and I granted their wishes to skip the second half. I'm sure that often in our opinions we miss the better part because we skip the second half. A poem, author unknown. We are hungry for the old simplicities, for the friendliness on which our parents fed, for the long unhurried hours of quiet peace, for the neighborliness that was their daily bread, for sympathy welling at some heart's brink, and for wayside pools of love at which we drink. Let us find amid the rush and roar somewhere the old simplicities that should be there. So the first half, blessed. And I looked it up. It's blessed, I guess, the preferred pronunciation first. And so I tried to say blessed. The first half of these verses talk about the poor, the mourning, the meek, those that hunger and thirst for righteousness, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, and the persecuted. First half. Second half. And this is the emphasis on the second half. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They shall be comforted. They shall inherit the earth. They shall be satisfied. They shall obtain mercy. They shall see God. They shall be called sons and daughters of God, and for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This is the second half. So Matthew, first of all, wants us to see that these words that he has gathered together from the teaching of Jesus and made them the official teaching of Jesus in these Beatitudes. And that's what Matthew wants us to see. It is the opening of the mind of Jesus to his disciples and followers. It is a summary of the teaching that Jesus habitually gives throughout the Scriptures. It is a concentrated memory of many hours of heart-to-heart communion between the disciples and their master and teacher. Jesus knew their need and the needs of the crowd. So the Beatitudes demand our exacting self-examination as we compare our lives to this supreme teaching of Jesus. I'm still reading the Carl Jung book. It's a large tome, that thick, that big, weighs about 10 pounds. It's his lifetime. It's published 50 years after his death. As he came to the end of his life, Carl Jung, undoubtedly one of the world's greatest psychiatrists, which is indisputable, said this: during the past 30 years, people from all civilized countries over Europe have consulted me. You see, only civilized people are in Europe. I've treated many hundreds of patients. Among all my patients over the age of 35, there was not one whose problem in the final analysis was not that of finding a religious outlook on life. It is safe to say, then, that every one of them fell ill because they lost that which the living religions of every age had given to their followers. And I would say that not one patient in 30 years under my care was ever healed unless he gained a healthy religious outlook. Healthy religious outlook. We must recognize our need for a healthy religious outlook. And I would say in our culture, television, and in life and up and down the street, there are as many unhealthy religious outlooks as there are religious, healthy outlooks. Secondly, Jesus would urge his followers and all Christians to be simple in their love for him. Sometimes we get lost in the forest. It doesn't matter if we know which hillside on the shores of Galilee that Jesus walked up and sat down. It doesn't matter if we know all the doctrines of salvation, the second coming, and neglect his first coming. It doesn't matter if we understand the eschaton, the apocalypse, or the parousia. It doesn't matter if we know the date, the star of Bethlehem, and we leave that up in this Epiphany season. It doesn't matter if we understand the nature of his coming, whether it's second, third, or fourth. But it matters whether we simply live the Beatitudes, the simple, concise, direct teaching. And Thoreau in Walden, who went into the woods, says, I went into the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and to see if I could not learn what it had to teach. An honest man has hardly need to count more than his 10 fingers Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. Simple, simplistic. Simple, simplicity, and not simplistic. Robert Louis Stevenson said, "We suffer from the malady of not wanting to be a Christian and committing our lives to God's kingdom." We relish the idea of committing our lives to ourselves, to whatever fad becomes our focus, to whatever passing fancy in which we are caught up, to whatever doctrinaire position that turns us on at the time. But we cannot escape these 12 verses, this new Decalogue, simply how to live correctly and rightly as a Christian in this world. Last, the Beatitudes bind us together in a new family. Therefore, it's a family that gathers us, and we are blessed just by being a Christian. We join with those dispossessed by commercialization, by urbanization, by economics, by poverty, both rich and poor. The Beatitudes speak to those that are poor and lost, who live on the high mountain and in the deep valleys. They are the fountain of our soul, not an exterior materialism. There's an essence to the faith, a guide, an urgency to live by its precept. The most important thing he came with first. These blessings of God are meant to bring us happiness, pleasure, and peace. Just like the rest of the disciples, we are forever blessed and haunted by these words of instruction. They are a far-off, distant goal. Yet what a revolution, the core of a revolutionary book. We can't fulfill it. We can only make it our aim. It is not wrong to aim at the stars, and we might finish in second place. We just can't resist domesticating the revolution and making our faith provincial. Lost in dark places. These are clear words that demand revolutionary living, and they're paid into a person's well-being. It's an investment in eternal securities, a recovery of a spiritual life. It's not about hearing, reading, or knowing. It's about doing. Doing them. Do the second half. The Beatitudes became incarnate. The biography of Jesus, the most thrilling the world has ever known. We try to forget Jesus, and we can't. When his presence becomes too awkward, we shuffle him off to some new Calvary. But he reappears. The world's unquiet conscience, to whom sooner or late we must surrender, for he is the curse of our orderly selfishness. So the Beatitudes explode like a landmine to our success-worshiping culture. The blessedness of the family gives us a character to be called blessed. And Jesus describes the character not of ideas or theories, but of a guide to regulate our practice, called praxis. He does this in 8 paradoxes. He shows us the way and how to do it, the standing rules of the Christian. He matched his life and his actions a congruence. His words and teachings came from a peaceful soul to our soul. He matched doing and saying, word and deed. We know what we have to do. This is always the beginning. It's a lifetime project. What are these? No one knows. The assignment for this week. How many like assignments? 2 or 3? How many have scissors at home? Oh yes, okay. For much of my life I lived by pulling out a little military desk drawer, one of those slide things, and on it I had the steps of AA. And each week I did one of those steps. Each morning I read it, each noon I read it, each evening I read it, each week I thought about it. I assign you hereby, not one of you can fail your assignment. Cut this out. Put it on your mirror. Begin each day with the first one. Number them. There are 8. Make it last a week, so you will begin. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. My God, what do you want me to do because of this verse? Begin your day that way. Leave it on your mirror. You'll be reminded of it several times. And I want to know about your assignment. In the name of Christ, amen. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also.